Crystal Griffith here. Welcome back for another daily digest of emotions, wisdom, and your body. For all of 2021, we're delving into how our emotions affect our body, soul, and spirit. And tonight, we have part 2 of what we started last night. So I'm so glad that you're back. I want you to remember, emotions are your body's wisdom. So here's your disclaimer. I am not a doctor. I do not play one on any social media platform, but I am here with a master's, 2 inner healing accreditations, and other certifications as well. And I'm merely just wanting to offer you some education, encouragement, and edification about your emotions so you can use them to your advantage. Leverage them for what you need them for, right? So tonight's version is part 2 of last night. Last night we talked about Jung's introvert. Today we're going to talk about Carl Jung's extrovert. And so I hope you learned a lot about introversion yesterday. You're going to actually learn a little more tonight about that as well, because we really want to just kind of pit it against understanding a little more in depth about extroverts. So is it positive or negative? Definitely a positive. Now, you can have people who just tend to talk too much. I have no idea what you're talking about. And so from there, they might not get in a word edgewise. So that's about the only time that we're really looking at. Maybe we need to back down a little bit, be a little quieter, so our introverted friends can come into the conversation and be a part, right? So what's an extrovert? Let's define that. So this is an outgoing, overly expressive person. Extroverts are refueled by being with others, and extroverts gain that energy from all types of social interaction. The extrovert is also a person who's concerned primarily with physical or social environment rather than with self. Extroverts are thought to be made up anywhere from half to 3/4 of the American population alone, which would explain all those little stereotypes in all the Hollywood movies of us being loud, brass, and obnoxious, right? I'm not calling extroverts those things. I'm just calling the Hollywood makes that look like us as Americans, which is not true, right? Introverts and extroverts have the same amount of dopamine. The difference is that dopamine release in an extrovert's brain, actually, they get an excited buzz in their reward center. So they want more. It's almost like they're a little addicted, so to speak, to that dopamine. They want more and more and more. So they're willing to be extroverted, and they're willing to interact more, and they're willing to gain that energy from other people in that interaction. So that gives them more dopamine. Now, extroverts are less sensitive to dopamine, so they need more of it to feel happy. That's why. The more that they talk, move, socialize, the more they feel dopamine's pleasant effects. So they want it, they crave more of it. So research has also suggested that extroverts tend to be happier, as well as being a little less prone to psychological events. And now I would tell you this. I am not going to say that that means the opposite. That does not mean introverts are more prone to psychological events. It does not mean that. So I just want to be super clear on this. Okay, folks, so don't read between the lines. Let's just listen to what we're saying. So there was an interesting blog and post from a scientific journal that I was reading. Jane Gronman shares some of the science insights between introverts and extroverts. And so this is where we're going to talk about both for a second. So a difference between introverts and extroverts has to do with our nervous system. Everyone's nervous system has 2 sides. The sympathetic system, which triggers fight, flight, freeze. And then we have the parasympathetic, which is for rest and digestive mode. Now, in other words, what does this mean? The sympathetic side is like hitting the gas pedal full on, okay? The parasympathetic is like slamming on the brakes to stop. When your sympathetic or your gas is activated, your body gears up for action. The adrenaline is released, the glucose energizes muscles, the oxygen increases, your blood viscosity gets thicker so you wouldn't lose blood if you got injured, your pupils dilate, you're more aware of your surroundings. Areas of your brain that control careful, measured thinking are turned off. Like fight, flight, or freeze, you just got to get out of the situation. You got to escape somehow, right? So dopamine increases an alertness in the back of your brain. Now, on the other hand, when you engage the parasympathetic side, remember, brakes are on, let's stop. Your muscles relax, actually. Energy is stored like a squirrel floral, preparing for winter. Might be why we might have the 10, 15, 20 extra pounds around the Christmas holiday season, because we are not moving as much as well. We are resting and digesting, just not as well as we need to. And really, acetylcholine increases the alertness and blood flow to the front prefrontal cortex, where all of your executive processing lives and exists. So you can make judgment calls and be rational and be regulated. That's what the parasympathetic is doing. When you slam on the brakes, that's what it's doing. Now, to be clear, extroverts and introverts use both sides of that nervous system piece, but just at different times. So which side do you think introverts usually prefer? You've probably already guessed. And according to Dr. Laney, they prefer the parasympathetic side. Just slow and calm, and they're able to process, and they're able to fuel themselves properly, right? And so the extroverts like, right, the sympathetic. Let's go, 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 right? Fight, flight, or freeze. And those who have a lot of dopamine need are the high riskers. Those are the ones jumping out of the plane, flying off of rocks, hang gliding, all that fun stuff. Now, introverts also, for another piece to the brain, have a larger, thicker gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. Why do you think that is? I want you to think about a muscle. If you're constantly working that muscle, what are you going to end up with? A little Popeye bump, right? When you do that, right? I don't have any of those. I should work on that. All right. So same thing for the brain. If you're using that muscle all the time, what's it going to have? It's going to begin to build up. The area of the brain associated with abstract thought and decision-making, which is your prefrontal cortex. So extroverts have thinner gray matter in that same area, which suggests that introverts may devote more neural resources to abstract thought, while extroverts tend to live more in the moment. So the spontaneous friends as your extroverts, now you understand why. They need more gray matter and then they won't be as spontaneous. But then again, spontaneous can be a good thing because sometimes, guys, we just need to live a little, right? And remember that we're alive. Now, this one was very interesting. So they actually do have a caveat to being an extrovert. So you think of extroverts being these big, brassy, like outgoing people, like Adele comes to mind. And really, Adele is not as extroverted as you think. If you actually watch her, she's actually very much like what we're about to describe. And for those of you who are older, you might understand this name in this example, Barbra Streisand. On stage, big voice, right? Just engages the audience, is full of just opportunity to create conversation between her and the audience. I mean, going to a concert with her was just amazing, right? But she and I do think Adele are called shy extroverts. Have you heard that one before? Shy extroverts. Now, this is someone who draws energy and enjoys being around other people, but may get nervous around strangers or may find it difficult to speak up in a group setting. So what you see is even these celebrities who are in the face of everybody all the time, right? Still, their personality is like, yeah, I'm gonna show up, I'm gonna do my thing, I'm gonna interact, but then once I'm done, I'm gonna be quiet, right? That's where the introvert piece comes in. But in this case, they call it shy for the extrovert, shy extrovert. It's kind of interesting. Now, those who lean towards being extrovert tend to be happier, more successful, and they're more likely to be leaders. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't buy that statement. So they're saying that introverts aren't those things. And I don't think that's true. I have met many, many introverts who are extremely successful and they're very happy and content with their life. And they are leaders within their niche of what they are leaders in. And people go to them and they contact them. There's just certain ways that they contact them. So there doesn't have to be huge engagement on a big stage. There could be a one-on-one in-depth conversation, which is what introverts want. They don't want to be on a big stage and have all these surface conversations. They want to go deep. Right? And so that's one thing to think about. Now, I will tell you, introverts have a little saying, they don't like to babysit other people, right? Why? Because then they feel like they have to interact more, right? So you might hear that phrasing from an introvert. Extroverts are like, everybody come on in, let's have a party. And the introverts are over here like, okay. I'm gonna go check out your office. And they're hiding in the office, right? So just keep in mind, be who you are. And don't feel like some of the things that we're sharing tonight means you have to change your personality. That is not the case. God has designed you to be exactly who you are, an introvert or an extrovert. And he has made you have a field of favor that is going to suit you perfectly. And in that field of favor, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is kingdom impact. And that may be that in-depth one-on-one. And for some of you, it may be a bigger crowd. And so walk in what God has equipped you with. That is my biggest suggestion for you. Now, a couple of other extrovert characteristics. They enjoy tending to be the center of attention, more that conversational center of attention, not ego. So then they also enjoy group work. They love those group projects. Let's get a team together. We can make this happen. They might feel a little isolated if they spend too much time alone. So our introverts during this quarantine have loved every minute of it. The extroverts, not so much. They like to communicate by talking, and they talk about their feelings, their thoughts, and sometimes they get called oversharers, but that doesn't mean that it's not deliberate to be intentional for connection. So even if you feel like they're like, oh my gosh, are you going to stop talking soon? They're not trying to steal the spotlight. That's the way they communicate. Kind of like we have verbal processors, right? And extroverts tend to be verbal processors at times. Now, they also look to others and outside sources for ideas and inspiration. Again, they're looking to talk through those thoughts and feelings to create that inspiration and to gain it. They have a lot of numerous and broad interests, and they tend to act first before thinking, whereas our introverts are thinking before they act. But extroverts tend to act before they think. So a couple of things. So because extroverts have this built-in dopamine need for that reward center, right? It's important not to dominate the conversations, and it's important not to attempt to fill silences. You can always tell who the extroverts are when you go to meetings and they've asked a question and everyone's kind of processing it and thinking about it, and instantly somebody fills the silence. One, they're usually uncomfortable by the silence. Two, they think it's awkward. And three, they're talkers. So they may be verbally processing. So I would just encourage everyone, take a step, think about a question, count to 30, then answer. Okay. So at least there's this bridge of silence that might be appropriate to the question that's been asked. Okay. Now, I just thought this was really cool. They were talking about different characters along the way, like the Barbra Streisand and Adele and stuff. But they had poo ideas. So who do you think the extrovert is? A boing, a boing, a boing, a boing, a boing. Yeah, Tigger, right? Can I just tell you, I'm just owning something here. It never hit me that Tigger meant tiger until about 10 years ago. Never. Didn't. Yeah, I got nothing on that one. Why? Now, who are your introverts? There's two. Piglet and Eeyore. Now, I think we all know Eeyore. We need to pray for Eeyore, right? But Piglet as well. And Piglet tended to step back. But when Piglet needs to, steps into. And that's what you're going to find with introverts. When they need to step into, they do. Now, our wisdom verses are going to be really different tonight. I actually wanted to talk about two pairs in the Bible instead of just giving you verses. So Peter and Paul, were they introverts or extroverts? What do you think? If you said extroverts, you were right. So Peter and Paul, formerly of the Saul variety, were extroverts. They were willing to go and talk and meet. And Peter was a great fisherman, and he commanded a group of fishermen, right? And Paul commanded, golly, big time number of people as Saul, but even as Paul, he kind of made himself a disciple in there, didn't he? And then who do you think the introverts were? John and Barnabas. John and Barnabas. And just a note, I took a religion class. I took several. I took a religious class, and we had to talk about Barnabas. And this is when spell check had just been introduced to the computers. Needless to say, my entire paper auto-corrected Barnabas to bananas, and I didn't catch it. Can you imagine turning in your paper for your college class and it's Paul and bananas? Yeah, I had a delightful college education. So John and Barnabas were the introverts. Now, John spent a lot of time in prison, as did Paul. But John really, in his letters out, they were not geared to whole cities like Paul's were, right? So if you really catch that, so it really makes sense that John was an introvert as well. So Peter and Paul could not have possessed, though, the ministries that they did if it were not for John and Barnabas. So that's what I really want you to capture. Extrovert and introvert, they really do combine together to make a whole. And so it's not one against the other. It's not one is better than the other. It is absolutely, they build together for a unity that only together they could glean and they could create in the kingdom, and in whether that be business kingdom or whether that be ministry kingdom, whatever that is, even family kingdom. But you need both to be complete, right? So Peter wrote a couple of letters, but focused his attention on evangelism. But where would the church be if it were not for the theologically rich documents written by John? And if it were not for the introverted Barnabas, the extroverted Paul's ministry would not have taken flight. I don't know if you guys caught that, but oftentimes Barnabas went ahead of Paul and kind of laid the groundwork, very similar to John the Baptist before Jesus came into that town. And so they work together. Isn't that so cool that they were willing to do that? And it made a complete ministry. So I want to encourage you to go out and read more on Peter and Paul and John and Barnabas, and really understand how introvert and extrovert characteristics are really infiltrated within their storylines. So how are you going to use this amazing new information about extroverts? And how are you going to apply it to your life? Remember, wisdom is not just the hearing, but the understanding and application. So here are your 3 questions. How has this emotion of being an extrovert, it's a personality trait actually, been showing up in your life? Are you an extrovert? If you're not an extrovert and you know you're an introvert, who do you know that's an extrovert? How are they influencing your life? What do you like about their life as an extrovert? What do you not like about their life as an extrovert? And how could you possibly interact a little differently with extroverts? Now, has it been a positive or negative experience for you so far? And then our 3rd big question is, how can you transform extroverts into something that really can delve deeper and bring you to a different level in your relationship with the Lord, in life, in ministry, in business, and your family? How can you partner with them? So I want you to go live and share what you learned about extroverts today. Tomorrow's word, we're getting back to where we were, is self-sabotage, the infiltration of our fears, anxiety, and timidity with our decision-making. So that self-sabotage can actually apply to both introverts and extroverts. If you're an extrovert and you are going into a situation where there's not going to be a lot of people, would you consider that self-sabotage? If you were an introvert and you were going into a situation with a lot of people and you didn't create white space for you on the other side of that so you could recharge your batteries afterwards, would that be self-sabotage? So those are really important things to think about. So join us again tomorrow as we talk about it and on more emotions, wisdom, and your body, and register at K Crystal Griffith to receive more insights and your feeling wheel. Until then, guys, have a blessed day. Take care.